What's up, everybody? Corey Hughes, Bloody History. So, this week I got a lot of stuff. My notes are very scattered. I'm still in the process of kind of assembling everything. So, you're going to have to work with me as I kind of move through some individual screenshots I took. Because I've been so scattered the past couple days, it's going to be a bitch for me to consolidate all this stuff into a presentation, which I'm already doing. I got 350 slides already, and I got with the stuff I've recently discovered, it's going to end up being 500-600 slides just on Oswald's life with Marguerite and all that stuff, the Marines, all that kind of stuff. Although I do have a section on Kerry Thornley, I got a section on Bud Simcoe. I'm thinking about adding a section of miscellaneous photographs just for people to look at, because I found a whole bunch of photographs from Oswald from way back in the day. But yeah, so I made some pretty big discoveries this week. First and foremost, Armstrong wrong again, and unfortunately, I think I've caught Armstrong, cherry picking some stuff, which is unfortunate because his thesis is true. Okay, no matter how many things that he seems to screw up or misinterpret, his underlying thesis is beyond true. There were absolutely, no question, two Lee Harvey Oswalds. This becomes brutally obvious in the Marine Corps. And it was so obvious that even Garrison caught it. When you go through Garrison's documents, he's got the one where he says, this impersonation must have began in the Marines. And he was correct. He was correct. Actually, it began before that. But for all intent and purposes, the Marines was, in part, an experiment by naval intelligence and the Marine Corps staff to see if they could pull this off. And I think that they couldn't, and I think Martin Schramm's death was most certainly a side effect of this experiment. And for me, so let me try to see if I can just really quickly get the whole Corregidor thing out of the way. So there was another ship that came through. See, here's the problem. We have the official story, and then we have the story of the other Oswald, who obviously did not get on the same boat, right, there or back. So I've been looking for additional ships that could have made that trip. And of course, I found one. God, I don't have it. It's the Henrico, the USS Henrico, I believe. The Henrico left from San Diego to San Francisco, and it made it out to Iwakuni in September 2nd. I believe it was before the known voyage of Oswald got there. And then from there, what did that ship do? That ship then went to Corregidor, and then went to Okinawa, and then Corregidor, and it went to a bunch of places that it's been rumored that Oswald went, that we have no evidence that Oswald went, right? So to me, it seems pretty apparent that the other Oswald, Harvey Oswald, got on this boat, probably the Henrico, and took the Henrico all the way to Iwakuni, and then from Iwakuni didn't even probably get off the boat. Probably didn't even get off the goddamn boat and went right to Okinawa and Corregidor. Because remember, Oswald wrote on the bottom of the photograph 1957, Philippines, or he wrote Corregidor on there, and he spelled it wrong. But I'm sorry, I just cannot fathom Oswald writing 1957 when it's 1958. And so what I've gathered is from that trip alone, I don't know what ship he took. He was on the Henrico, and he was also on guard duty, right? So all these times he's supposed to be a goddamn radar operator. I can't find him as a radar operator. The closest I can get is him working the clear, the transparent board, where you mark things. People call stuff out and you mark it on the board. That's as close to a radar station that I can put him. I don't think the fucking guy was a radar operator. I think he went through the course, or I think both of them went through the course, and then when you see him listed as an AVN electric operator, that's for repair. That's for maintenance and repair. And then he gets assigned to a maintenance and repair unit out in Natsuki after he gets in trouble. So the fucking guy, I can't put him behind a radar unit ever. The only people who can are people like Nelson Delgado, who, if you read the statements of the other guys, what they thought of Delgado, that guy's a fucking boaster and a liar, and they said you shouldn't listen to him. So, I don't know what his deal is. But the reality is I can't put Oswald behind a radar console ever. Still looking, still open to that possibility, but the closest I got is Gajewski, right? Gajewski was with him out at Atsugi and was with him out at Corregidor, which is weird because Gajewski isn't involved in the Martin Strand incident whatsoever. And so Gajewski says about it, it's funny because in that Martin Strand file, and they don't have a statement from Oswald, but based on the statements of Camarada, it seems pretty apparent that Oswald was on guard duty that night. And not only that, we have statements of a guy named Robinson who was in charge, who came forward and said he was in charge. He was Oswald's direct supervisor for about a year when Oswald worked guard duty, not only at Atsugi, but on the boats that they were doing maneuvers at Corregidor in the Philippines, right? Unfortunately, the guy never mentions the name of the fucking boat. I'd like to know the name of that boat because I promise it is not the Skagit that it's supposed to be or whatever the other boat was that Oswald allegedly took on the 20th when he got out of the hospital, right, 20th of November. So there's major shenanigans with the boat stuff. So I'm pretty confident that Harvey Oswald got onto the Henrico, and the Henrico took him all the way to Okinawa and Corregidor. And then, from what I could tell, he was done with that based on the pay records. He ended that on December 22nd, right? He ended that tour of the South China Sea December the 22nd, and then made his way back to Iwakuni and Atsugi. You see, they did a swap-a-roo, they did a switch. And I think this is why Oswald shot himself, right? Lee Oswald, the real Oswald, shot himself, ended up in the hospital. That guy liked the hospital a lot. He must have been banging a nurse there or something, because that fucking guy was there so much. I even found another couple days that he was there for just a cold, right? So the guy ditched out on duty all the time just to be in the fucking hospital. And if he wasn't in the hospital, he was in the brig, right? So I can't put this guy doing any real work fucking ever almost. I can put him in the mess hall. I can put him in the brig. I can't put him in a radar unit. I can put him on guard duty. You see, everything we've been told about this fucking guy is a lie. Everything's a total fucking lie. And I just bought the book Missing Pieces about Oswald's time in the Marines, but written by a guy who spent 20 years researching this shit. So I'm hoping he's got some nuggets in there that I can pluck. But to me, the best evidence for Harvey and Lee is in the shenanigans with going to the South China Sea, whether it's Corregidor or Taiwan later on. Because at one time he goes into the fucking hospital, the other time he goes into the brig, and like this, the guy's just trying to get out of this shit really badly, right? For what reason? I don't know. Plus the fact that he got gonorrhea and all that stuff should have washed him out. And the funny thing is, like, I've come across a couple documents and a couple people who speculated that he did get washed out. I've got statements from people that say he got washed out everywhere from March 59 to May of 59 to July of 59 to September of 59. So there's intentional obfuscation there. And then when you get into like the medical records and the Folsom report, which are all connected to Oswald's time in the Marines, we're missing pages here. Because in the Warren Commission, they're referencing, go to Benedarian, what is his name? I forget the guy's name. The medical guy. He's like, go to page 122 or whatever it is. And I go to look for page 122, and my report stops at like page 36. Right? So we're missing like fucking 100 pages of documents that they were referencing in the Warren Commission that are not there today. Right? So this... Everywhere you look, they're fucking with the records, no matter how you cut it. And so, them fucking with the records and cutting us a line of bullshit is what we're going to talk about today, because I've been spending a lot of time on Marguerite Oswald, who, I don't know if you know this, but Marguerite Oswald, both of them are a bunch of lying cunts. And unfortunately, John Armstrong got a whole bunch of stuff wrong, and that's going to be the first thing I really knock out today. So, John Armstrong, love the guy. His thesis was good. His thesis is solid. I have not been able to undermine the thesis. The pictures clearly indicate two different men, unless they faked a man, and that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It wouldn't make any sense for why would Robert put that picture of Lee in his book. The only thing that's fucked up about Robert Oswald is he published it. He said that photograph of Lee where he's holding the rifle and they're out hunting, that he originally said it was taken in February 58. Then that became December 58. Then that became, whenever he got out of the Marines, which tells me, no, that was not a 1959 photograph. That was a 1958 photograph, and it was probably a February 58 photograph, which would also lend some credence to Palmer McBride and that whole shindig again. Palmer McBride, I'm still gonna. I don't know. There's some indications from some of the other guys at the New Orleans Astronomy Club that all the stuff had to have happened in at the earliest 57. But still, that contradicts the Marine report, right? So even in 57, early 57, Oswald was fucking busy. So there's major conflict surrounding Palmer McBride. Whenever there's smoke, there's definitely some fire somewhere. But I'm still spending time on Palmer McBride to figure out exactly what his deal is. But I want to talk about Marguerite Oswald because she's a liar, and Armstrong got this wrong. He got like I've said before, he got a lot of stuff wrong. But thanks to the fact that his thesis is correct, I'm willing to roll with the punches here. So first and foremost, let me just point this out. When it comes to the photograph of the alleged Marguerite Oswald imposter at 126 Exchange Place, the one with the 45-degree eyebrows, right? Okay, so let me say this with 100% certainty. Armstrong got this wrong. He labeled that woman as the false Marguerite Oswald. And he basically made it seem as though that's the same woman who was pretending to be Miss Oswald forever, right? I think he implied that was Margaret Keating. All that's wrong. Everything that he said about that is completely wrong. That photograph of that woman who's sitting in 126 Exchange Place with the 45-degree eyebrows is unquestionably Lillian Moret. That is Marguerite Oswald's sister, okay? And the more I dig into Marguerite Oswald's sister, the more I come to realize how fucking much of a goddamn liar she is. Okay? First and foremost, July 1955, I find records of her flying from Cuba to New York City. Why'd she do that? Why did she fly from Cuba to New York City in 1955 in July, and she's never mentioned it? It's not written anywhere. It's not in any document. It's not in any book. No one's ever discussed it before. Why the fuck did Lillian Moret fly from Cuba to New York City in fucking July of 1955? And how do I know this happened? Because I have the fucking flight manifest. Okay, which is on Ancestry.com. Just spend your $60 a month and go through Ancestry.com and you'll find this shit. I can't believe it's there. What else did I find? Well, not only did I find that the pictures of Marilyn Dorothea Moret are of two different people also. The picture of her at LSU and the picture of her at Loyola, two different people. Now, I don't know if that's just a mistake or what. I'm not going to go off on a tangent and get all paranoid yet. But if she was part of she was obviously part of some program. She was connected to the CIA. She has like 4 fucking college degrees from Duke and Loyola and all these places. And she spent time in Eastern Bloc countries and China. And I don't know if she ever went to the Soviet Union. But an article came out in the 1950s that basically lumped her in with Robert Webster and all the other false defectors. But it didn't mention that she was a cousin of Oswald. Right? Weird. So the family's connected. There's undoubtedly no way that they're not involved with something. There's no reason for Lillian Moret to be flying from Cuba to New York in 1955 and then never ever mention it. Okay, what's the next record I have? The next record I have. 1954. I forget the months, but it was earlier in 54. I believe it was around April-ish of 1954. I have Lillian Moret, along with Marilyn Dorothea Moret, flying to an Air Force base in Bermuda for a week. The two of them flew to Kinsley Air Force Base, Bermuda, and they were there for 6 days. I've got the flights there. I got the flights back. My first instinct is that they're visiting Charles Jr., because Charles Jr. at this point, when you look at Charles Jr., he's an interesting guy. I don't know what his deal is. He's a dentist, right? Okay, so his whole thing is he was a dentist, and he was a captain. This is what I don't understand. This is where I start to lose Charles here. Charles was a captain in the Army, I believe, or Air Force, or one of those. I think it was just the Army. During the Korean War, but he was a captain of the dentist fucking brigade. You know, they thought it was a good idea for them to have dentists on hand during war so people can get their teeth fixed, and it was a good idea, right? So that's what he did. He was a captain. So he gets in. I don't have any records of him having a degree before getting in, but I don't know how long he could have possibly been in. At this point, he's maybe 30-something years old, 40-something years old. And so I don't know how he got to be a captain, but he was. He was a captain of the Dental Corps, and he was stationed for Korea. And Korea is what, 51 to 53. Then the next thing on Charles's resume is that it said he got his Master's of Dentistry from Loyola University in 1954. So my question is, could they have been visiting Charles at the Air Force Base out in Bermuda? Well, number one, they never mentioned it, so they're hiding it. So if at this point, if nobody's ever heard about it, and I'm talking about it, and then obviously they fucking hid it, and once again, fuck all you Kennedy researchers who haven't been able to figure this out in fucking 60 years, because this took about 10 fucking minutes. So these records here show that they went to Bermuda to an Air Force base, and I can't really find what was going on at the Air Force base. It seems like it was after World War II. It was kind of abandoned, but it was being used for some things, and the British were still there. But there's no record of anything why they were going there. But they did. They went there, and it was in 1954. I believe it was in April. Spent 6 days there. The two of them. Why would the two of them do this unless it was connected to their brother? But their brother was supposed to be in school at this time where he got his master's in dentistry from Loyola. So I see a conflict of interest in time here. What are they doing flying to Air Force bases and then never ever mentioning it? No one ever mentions Air Force service. See, when they get to the Moretz, they kind of skip over a whole lot of stuff, and for probably good reason. Because Lillian was most certainly involved in some other shady shit that I'm going to talk about. Oh, and really quickly, and how do I fucking know that woman is Lillian Moret, who's at 126 Exchange Place? Well, for two reasons. One reason is we have another picture, the only other picture known of Lillian Moret, and it's from about 7 or 8 years later, 1962, when she's at Thanksgiving with all the family, right? The very famous Thanksgiving film strip where it clearly shows that Ed Pick ain't having none of this. He don't know what the fuck's going on because the guy who says he's his brother ain't his brother, is there chilling out with his wife and stuff. And so it's a really weird, awkward fucking video. Everybody should watch it. It's on YouTube. It's only about a minute long. But clearly you can see Lillian Moret in that video, and it's her. It's the straight up same woman, aged 7 or 8 years. So John Armstrong, we can scratch that one off the list. Debunked. That is not the false Marguerite at 126 Exchange Place. Okay, the second reason I know that that's a Lillian Moret is because I actually have a picture of the real Marguerite Oswald at 126 Exchange Place. And this is where it gets really good. She's wearing she's wearing a costume for Carnival, right? They do Carnival early in the year, I believe. And she's wearing that outfit, but this is not Carnival 1955. This is Carnival 1956, before they moved back to Fort Worth, okay? And this is great because, so this is what John Armstrong got right, but I don't think that he really worked out the full details on why he got this right. So number one, he believed that Harvey Oswald had come to New Orleans and was attending a Beauregard during the first semester of 53, meaning like September to December. But there's just no evidence of that at all. There really just isn't. The earliest evidence we have includes, number one, is application to Beauregard, which was on the 1st, right? The 1st of January, which means it was sent in from New York. We don't have an envelope or anything. But then what we have is the actual registration start date, which is the 14th of January, which is when school started. And we know that because, he started on the 14th. It started a week before that, but he had left New York on the 7th. Remember, because they called him and talked to his mother on the 6th at the apartment, and then they called the next day and she was already gone. Or they called him the 10th and she was gone. So everything makes sense in regards to, unless you're going to buy into the North Dakota stuff, which would be Harvey in North Dakota, Lee still in New York. Lee goes to Fort Worth, and then Harvey goes down to New Orleans, that's plausible. That is plausible. I'm still digging into North Dakota and Stanley, but no, there's connections there. There's intelligence connections in Stanley, North Dakota for sure that I've stumbled across, but I need to spend a lot more time on that. But that's not really what my obsession is lately. My obsession is the duplicity of Lillian Moret and Marguerite Oswald. So let me just restate. I have a photograph that I'm looking at right now. It's the real Marguerite, and she's sitting inside of 126 Exchange Place. Now, here's where things got really good with 126 Exchange Place, and it took me a while to comprehend this because I'm still going through the lies of Robert Oswald. Robert Oswald, who's Lee Oswald's brother, I don't even know if any of these people are who they say they are, But Robert Oswald's a total fucking liar. And it's funny, when you go through the Warren Commission testimony, you can see them constantly correcting him, just like Lillian Moret and Marguerite. When they get things wrong, they're being corrected by the Warren Commission guys. Particularly Dulles chimes in a bunch of times. And anytime Robert Oswald goes off the fucking hilt, Alan Dulles wants to take a break, right? It's hilarious. So Robert Oswald's a fucking liar, and he's involved with both Harvey and Lee. This is absolute fact. There's no way that this man cannot be, because of basically the circumstances. So this is what I've got. I've got the beginning of 1954, January-ish. We've got Harvey Oswald and his fake Marguerite mother are living at 126 Exchange Place, where he is going to school at Beauregard. We know with absolute certainty that somebody was going to Beauregard in January of 1954, and that they continued all the way through what would be May or June of 1956. So you've got a solid 2 years at Beauregard, and we have the records for that, from January 54 through June of 56, when he graduates from there with a certificate. And then we'll begin, the 10th grade at Warren Easton High School. And Warren Easton High School is where they run into some major conflict. But there's a problem here. This is the problem. The problem is, when you go through all the testimonies, particularly Robert Oswald and Lillian Moret, who they have to keep changing because they don't know what the answer is, this is what we'll discover. The very first fucking time that Marguerite Oswald and her son Lee Oswald are in New Orleans is, we don't really know. The only concrete evidence we have of them being in New Orleans is when they first reach out to her friend who ran the apartments on St. Mary, right? 1242 and 1244, I believe. I forget the numbers offhand, but there were two apartments on St. Mary that were both run by this woman who was a friend. Myrtle, is that her name? Ethel Myrtle? Myrtle, something. It's on the tip of my tongue. You guys know what I'm talking about. So this is the first evidence we have of her and Lee being in New Orleans. Okay? Because before that, we've got the testimony of Lillian Moret, who says, yeah, she came with Lee and they stayed with me for a week or two, and then they moved in over at at first she said Exchange Place. This is funny because in her testimony, she goes, yeah, she stayed with me for a week or two, and then they moved into Exchange Place. And then Liebler is like, oh, wait a minute, don't you mean St. Mary? And she said, oh, yeah, I went into St. Mary first, and that's Ethel, whatever the fuck her name is, right? Myrtle, what's her last name? I can't recall. Myrtle Evans and her husband Julian. So, but both of them confirm that they were in there from May 1st, 1954 to May 1st, 1955. Now, what's the problem here? Can you see the problem already? We don't have Marguerite and Lee Oswald in New Orleans until May. Let's back it up a couple weeks. Let's say mid-April, because let's just believe Moret for a second and say that they went and stayed with Moret for a couple weeks. So stay with Aunt Moret for a couple weeks, and then gets the place on St. Mary May 1st. Okay, you got 4 fucking months of Lee Harvey Oswald attending Beauregard, where he's hanging out with fucking Ed Vabell, right? See, Ed Vabell's another one. He ends up getting murdered. I don't want to hear about this shit. You die when you're 25 and you died of an accident and you just happen to be connected to the Oswald situation. Fuck you. Anybody who died connected to any of this stuff got murdered. It was that important to them. So yeah, we got Harvey Oswald is down there in Exchange Place. We have photographs from Carnival 1954 that depict a very young Harvey Oswald, identified by relatives and friends and all that stuff. So the records of Exchange Place are definitely bunk, okay? And so then what do we have? We have Myrtle Evans is renting out the St. Mary's Place to Marguerite, and she said she was in the 1424? She's there for 8 months. And then she comes down and she's like, I can't afford this place. I got to get something cheaper. And she went and moved her into 1442. It was like 2 numbers off, right? But it was in the same house. She just moved her to a smaller apartment, and she stayed there for 2 months. So in all, they stayed there 10 or 11 months. They got in there on May the 1st, and really the exit at this point would have been let's just say May of 1955, right? And the official story is that this is when she moved into Exchange Place. But there are multiple problems with that, because I've got letters postmarked from Marguerite to Ed Pick, October 1954, from Exchange Place, right? And I've got the letter from May 1st, or May 10th, actually, to Ed Pick. So we can definitely say that at some time between May and October, letters to Ed Pick started to be sent with a different return address, indicating that they were at 126 Exchange Place. So the problem then becomes, we've got both of them here in New Orleans. And this here coincides in 1955 with statements of Robert Oswald and statements of Lillian Marguerite that, according to, you see, Robert Oswald kept changing his fucking story. First, it's he only visited him once. First, then he visited him twice. Then it's, oh yeah, I visited him 3 times. I forgot about this one. And then all of a sudden, he's got all this detail on what he did. So, around summer 1955, you've got Harvey Oswald, who's been at Beauregard for a year and a half, right? Now, here's another thing that I believe that John Armstrong got totally wrong. We do have the photographs of Lee Oswald at Beauregard where he's missing the tooth. Right? So at some point he had to have gone there. That would have had to have been what? That would have had to have been fall of 1955. Or the first semester of 1956. The problem is nobody remembers Lee Oswald being there at all. Nobody. And this is where you have the statements of Myra DeRoos, who's like, he said, call me Harvey, right? And Myra DeRoos, I watched her video over a bunch of times to clarify, and she met him in January of the 1953-54 school year, just like I said earlier. Perfect timing. Now, I don't believe for a split second, because this is where you have Armstrong says that Lee Oswald was in a different homeroom at the same time. Bullshit. I promise you Armstrong got this wrong. Harvey Oswald is at the school by himself, and he is there until Lee comes in, probably for just that last semester before the graduation. And they're never there at the same time. It's stupid to think that at all. And nobody remembers Lee Oswald being there the first half of the year 1954. So what does this indicate to me? This indicates to me that after leaving New York, Marguerite and Lee Oswald went to Fort Worth, Texas. Now, Harvey Oswald had already left with his mother, and they had left over the summer, where they're seen in North Dakota. From there, they went down by January of 1954, so Harvey Oswald could start school at Beauregard. This is where he then meets Myra DeRoos, and all that stuff happens with Myra DeRoos. He has the piano fall on him. Ed Vabell comes, and see, this is why they murdered Ed Vabell, because anybody who knew both of them got murdered. That's why I think Powers got murdered. That's why Schramm got murdered. Anybody who knew both of them got murdered. But it had been driving me nuts what Armstrong was trying to get at with this 126 Exchange Place stuff. And I think the reason I was having a hard time figuring it out is because he got some stuff wrong. He got a bunch of stuff wrong. But when you lay everything out based on the statements of everybody and their contradictions, and you're like, oh yeah, it was 1954. Oh no, it was 1955. Oh no, maybe it was 56. Like, I don't forget shit. You ask me what I did when, and I could recite pretty much anything from my fucking life and what year it was at any given time. These people can't, none of them. Not a fucking one. So, at the end of the day, Harvey Oswald ends up down in New Orleans, and then they have to do the swap-a-roo with the apartment, right? And so this is when Robert Oswald, when he gets out of the Marines, he's there, he says this is exactly what he testified to, and this is backed up by Lillian Marguerite's statement, is that summer 55, he got a car, he went back to Fort Worth, he got a car, and he drove to New Orleans within the first week of being out of the Marines. Then Lillian Marguerite says she came home one day and he was there, and they left with him. Okay, so they all met up at Lillian's house, which is 757 French. Robert Oswald comes in, and this is probably because he starts to meld stories. He says initially he comes in January of 54 to visit, and that Lee Oswald is already in the Civil Air Patrol, but we know that's not true. That doesn't happen for another year and a half, right? So the story about Robert Oswald coming perfectly fits with his own statement that he got out of the Marines in the summer of 55. And then he bought a car and then drove to New Orleans. They meet up at the Moret's house. He picks them up. From there, Robert Oswald will take Harvey Oswald and the fake Marguerite, who thanks to Diana, we've been talking about this and going over a lot of paperwork lately. Diana, we have a pretty solid idea who we think this fake Marguerite Oswald might be. But I'm not going to talk about it today because I'm still working on it. But we have a pretty strong suspicion on who the fake Marguerite is. And it connects directly to the Clinton voter registration incident and Reeves Morgan and all that stuff, which is really good. Which brings in Kerry Thornley and Clay Shaw and all those guys, which is awesome. And it makes perfect sense, too, once you actually kind of get a grip on it. But back to the story. So Robert Oswald picks them up, 1955, summer. That's when they switch. But remember, at some point in time, this is where I'm kind of hung up on, at some point in time, you've got Myrtle Evans, who chased Marguerite Oswald, the real Marguerite, right, because she was a friend of hers. She chased her to the address at 1031 West 6th, I believe, which then actually showed up in a Marine report. So the address that she claimed, Myrtle Evans claimed, was actually a valid address, and she had actually been living there. So we've got some swap-a-roo with that address, and I don't really understand the situation there, but there's most certainly overlap with that and 126 Exchange Place. And then you have Robert bringing them back to Fort Worth, and that is when you will have another split. You will have a split at some point because they'll move in. Harvey Oswald and Robert and Mother will end up staying at the Collinwood address, right? But then at some time, and that starts in 1955 to summer 1956, or give or take, I think. Oh, no, it was summer 56 to summer 57, and then the Oswald left to go to the Marines. But at that same time, you also have Marguerite Oswald, probably the real Marguerite Oswald, moving into 3830 West 8th, was it 8th Street? And that's the one that by August of 1957 is stamped on the postcard that Oswald sends from Hawaii, right? So I'm slowly moving into that era of the address complications. But I've sorted out 126 Exchange Place. It makes perfect sense to me what they did, and it did absolutely involve both Oswalds. So anyone out there still debating whether or not there's two Oswalds, you need to get with the fucking program. The alternative to there being not two Oswalds, the alternative would be so absolutely fucking ridiculously complicated on a scale I couldn't even begin to explain. Because they have to be faking a duplicate Oswald, and why would they do that? They wouldn't. It's ridiculous. The only thing that gets me is I can't find a picture of Lee Oswald where his face isn't looking directly at you. I need one where I want to see a profile pic of Lee Oswald, not the one with the pointy nose, the one with the rounded nose. And not the one with the attached earlobes, but the detached earlobes. So yeah, it's kind of ridiculous to think that there isn't two Oswalds at this point. So, but that being said, Armstrong's work obviously can't take at face value. That's why I'm double checking everything, because he did get a ton wrong. Another thing he got wrong, and we're going to talk about this now, and this opens up a whole fucking another can of worms, but it makes perfect sense. So when John Armstrong wrote Harvey and Lee, he found in the CIA files, and from originally a file from the investigation to un-American activities, which was around the time of the Kefauver hearings, I think. You had investigations into communists and all this stuff. And there was a file that was found connected to Marguerite Oswald that had something to do with New Jersey and Nazis. Right? That's all that's there. That's all that Armstrong could find. But she was somehow listed in this file in regards to un-American activities. Dating 1941 New Jersey. So, 1941. Let's take a look at Marguerite Oswald and Lee Oswald's life in 1941. 1941, they're living at... All right, we're years away from Alvar and all that stuff. Let me see if I got this handy that I can pull up really quickly. Because the address situation is just fucking out of control with Marguerite Oswald. So So we have her bouncing around to a couple places and purchasing a couple places in 41, and there's really nothing shady here. We got her at 1242 Congress, 1010 Bartholomew. Before that, you've got her on like Galvar Street and stuff like that, and those streets are connected to her parents, the Claveries. And so then this is where you start to run into some major problems. Allegedly, the last thing that we know of her buying a house is the 1010 Bartholomew, which she bought on March 5th, 1941. Now, at the time Ed Pick was in the Bethlehem orphanage, he didn't know anything about the Bartholomew house when they asked him about it later. So he was never there because he was in the orphanage. And allegedly, Marguerite stays in a duplex at 831 Pauline with Lee, but only in January of 42. Okay, this is the official record, allegedly only in January of 1942. I 100% dispute that she was at 831 Pauline in January 42. I am at this point convinced the person who rented 831 Pauline with Lee, if this happened at all, was Lillian Moret. And I'll explain. So Marguerite Oswald is a disgusting fucking cunt human being who, even the original Marguerite, is just a soulless fucking black-hearted bitch. And her fucking kids hated her because she was a fucking cunt and she didn't care about nothing but money. She didn't care about her kids. If she could have fucking given her kids away to an experiment or anything like that, she would have. She tried to give them all to the orphanage and tried to send them all away to fucking military school. She just didn't want kids because she would rather be a whore, because that's what she was, because she was cheating on every single guy she was with. And that turns up when you start to dig through the documents. So, that being said, let's put aside the fact that she's a fucking horrible human being and a liar. We have two addresses for her that are attributed to having been in Algiers. But of course, the morons out there who look at these addresses and they say Algiers, Louisiana, and then look it up and they see that the documents make it very clear that no one named Marguerite Oswald ever lived at either of these addresses. Yet these addresses, where do they come from? They come from the credit report. They come from this woman's credit report, okay? Credit reports don't usually get things wrong. They might have dates wrong, but they usually don't get addresses wrong because those addresses were reported by companies. So the two addresses we have for her are 2136 Broadway, which in the area that I found this place, there is no 2136 Broadway anymore. There's a 2130 and a 2139, but that wasn't the case in 1941 and 42. We also have a 227 Atlantic Avenue, allegedly Algiers, Louisiana, but when those people were interviewed, it became apparent that no one had ever stayed there named Marguerite Oswald, and the only people who'd ever lived there had been there for like 40, 50 years, and that had been there uninterrupted. So, what does that tell you? That these addresses, number one, because they came from the credit report, are valid, and number two, that they're not in Algiers, Louisiana. So, connecting back to 1941, Marguerite Oswald, New Jersey, and Nazis, hello, Un-American Activities file. I'm like, well, shit. When I think 2136 Broadway, and when I think Atlantic Avenue, I think New York. I grew up in Brooklyn. These are commonly known roads up there. I heard my dad talk about Atlantic Avenue more times than I could count. So I start to look up these addresses up in New York, and sure as shit, of course, they're valid addresses up there. The 2136 is today 2130 Broadway, and it's known as the Hotel. It wasn't the Belvedere. It was the. Here we go. It is the Hotel Beacon. The Hotel Beacon in New York City, which at the time was a pretty fancy hotel. Let me read some of the notable tenants. This is all old-timey stuff, so most of us aren't going to know these. A.H. Woods, Broadway producer. Artis Modus Caldis, a figurative painter. Richard de Rybowski, American artist born in Bulgaria. And he's known for his paintings called Old Ironsides. Then you have Gerard Ellisindri, American playwright. Greta Stuckgold, soprano opera singer. Herbert Dusant, tenor opera singer. Gusti Brandt, a philanthropist. Bertha Vorzimer, a dress designer who introduced many Paris fashions to New York. A whole bunch of people. And has lists of general managers from what years. But this hotel has been there since 1928. It looks like it's been redone, and the facade looks brand new. But this building's been here 100 years. And to me, the big kicker of them all, I'm like, wait a minute. So when you go through the statements of Lillian Moret, and they're trying to work out this address stuff while she's giving her testimony, they're like, well, you had Lee for how long? Because remember, this is what happened. So Marguerite, sometime in 1941, she'll buy the Bartholomew House, and while she's doing that, Robert and Ed Pick are already in the care of the Bethlehem Orphanage, because Ed Pick didn't know anything about the Bartholomew House. But see, no one ever lived at the Bartholomew House. She bought the Bartholomew House, and then she went to New York. And why did she go to New York? Well, I don't know what brought her there, but when you dig into the story of how she met Edwin Ekdahl, Ed Pick says that she was working at Pittsburgh Glass Company and that she was a telephone operator. No, I don't believe she was a telephone operator ever. Okay, that's somebody else's gig that they melded into her story, because that happens a lot here. But he said she was working for Pittsburgh Glass when she met Edwin Ekdahl, and he was down here in Rockville, Texas, or Rockwall, Texas, where they got married, Rockwall. Well, the Rockwall, Texas marriage, I think, was a cover for the fact that Edwin Ekdahl lived in let me see, what the fuck county is this? Rockdale County, which is just north of Manhattan in Yonkers, about 20 minutes away from 2130 Broadway, which is the Hotel Beacon, which was 2136. Actually, back in the day, it had a bunch of addresses up to 2139. But 2139 is actually a neighboring building, the Ansonia condominiums, which was originally the Ansonia Hotel at 2109 Broadway. That's another one, a bunch of rich and famous people there. So this is where she was. This is the address, 2130 Broadway in New York City. And how the fuck do I know this? Because Edwin Ekdahl was living at 210 North Broadway. Now, the numbering system is different because he was in Yonkers, which was like 20 minutes. If you kept going up Broadway, you'd get right to his place. But what are the odds that Edwin Ekdahl would be living at 210 North Broadway at the same time that Marguerite Oswald ditches all of her kids, 2 of them to the orphanage and 1 of them to her sister Lillian, and then gets in a car or plane or whatever, and military transport, who knows, ends up on North Broadway just up the road from Edwin Ekdahl? Give me a fucking break. It's not coincidence, but I don't believe it was Edwin Ekdahl that brought her up there. It was obviously something else, and it's obviously connected to the Un-American Activities file from 1941, New Jersey, and Nazis. Right? So these are the clues that I have to go on today. I'm looking for Nazis in New Jersey in 1941 that are connected to Marguerite Oswald. And I keep going through Marguerite. I look for all these different Marguerites, Claverys, you name it. I'm looking for them. But this is what happened, okay? So I was still, once again, why in 60 fucking years nobody else could figure out that the bitch didn't live in Algiers, that she lived in New York City, which is corroborated by that fact. And then here's another one. When the fucking FBI go and talk to Hazel Oswald, who is the widow of William Stout Sr. Oswald, she straight up told them that they went to New York. She said after Robert died, she went to New York, and she didn't see her again until she came back in 1954. Well, obviously she came back before then, right? But she most certainly went up to New York, did something for about 2 years, lived at 2 places, lived at this address at 2130 Broadway, which is the Hotel Beacon, which was 2136 then, and she lived at 227 Atlantic Avenue, which if you look in the area, there's a couple, but the most likely one that she's at was in Staten Island, which was basically just south of where she was at the Hotel Beacon. So, once again, things are getting solved. We're figuring things out. What we need to come to understand is what drew her to New York in the first place. There have been statements made that Oswald had family up there. There are definitely Claverys up there. There's even Moret's up there. So, and then when I go through those, I want to rehash that I have those fucking travel records of Lillian and Marilyn Moret. A lot of the Marilyn stuff passed through New York when she went to Amsterdam a bunch of times and all over the place. I have all those records. So, yeah. I think that's going to about wrap it up for me today. This is the bulk of my new discoveries. But this is big stuff. This is really big stuff, okay? And this is all going to be in my next book. I was going to do the next one on Israel, but I kind of understand now why I've been putting it off, because this is so much more fucking intriguing. So much more intriguing. So, yeah. So the Moretz are balls deep in all this stuff. The Moretz are unquestionably connected to intelligence in one way, shape, or form. So is Marguerite. This is all one big fucking pre-Cold War intelligence operation that we don't know why, we don't know where it's going, we don't know how long it lasted, we don't know anything. All we know is we've been lied to about everything, and these people are not who they appear to be. So, but that's going to do it for me today, guys. I'll be back tomorrow or the next day, hopefully with some more to share. I've been absolutely fucking exhausted, and actually I've been really kind of not overly in the greatest of health lately. So I've been trying to take it easy, but I can't take it easy because I have to get these answers. And we're getting closer and closer to realizing that none of these people are who they say they were, you know? So thanks, guys. I will be back tomorrow.